Hello, I am the High Apostate of Apostatopolis, and this is the Apostate's Playground. Apostate, we are going to today be going to Russia to talk about Jesus, the Rearisen. First, there's a little bit of housekeeping-y type stuff. I may end up doing Bible study on a different feed, depending on how long they end up. I don't feel like staying between the 20 to 40 minute mark and then dropping huge hours long chunks of Bible in your feeds is reasonable. But at the same time, I don't want to just jerk those away because I do them for me. And they do get about the same listeners as these types of episodes. So while non-biblical episodes do tend to be more popular, on average, not always by much, and I'm happy to wait for feedback on that or not, because as always, I want to put out something I want to make, but I also want to put out something that you want to listen to, because I appreciate your attention. Although, and I realize no one asked, my ADHD treatment is going really well, and so I will hopefully be getting back to weekly episodes before too long, and if I do that, the whole thing may work itself out anyway. So this might just be me being kind of weird and neurodivergent and losing track of thoughts. It's a weird time right now, and I thank you for hanging with me. Then the name change. I didn't really feel like I was smart enough or the show was smart enough to call it anything seminary. I felt like I was being cocky, and that's it, honestly. I like keeping the apostate thing because I am one. An apostate is somebody who leaves a religion or political ideology, and that it qualifies. I left a religion. I joined a couple other religions. I left those too, but they weren't as damaging. So I just changed to something a little less formal, a little less intellectual, and I think fits a lot better. This is me just running around in a world I left, not really taking it seriously anymore for the most part. Never taking it seriously at all, ever. If these motherfuckers would quit doing serious things and just go believe in their magic spells without using that nonsense to hurt people. And lastly, because of what's going on in Texas, a life doc of resources that I got from the show notes of the last episode of the Opening Arguments podcast, who gave their blessing to share it with you very nicely, will be in the show notes, along with other resources there as well. I can't imagine there's going to be a big amount of downloads coming out of Texas for a while, but if you know someone in an affected area and can contact them, please take every opportunity you can to share resources that could help keep them safe and healthy and alive. And at the end, when I mention Patreon, because that's what you're supposed to do, just go ahead and sub out a cause to help our friends, comrades, and compatriots in need in Texas. Now with all the very serious stuff out of the way, taking a trip over to Russia to talk about the recent second coming of Jesus, relatively recently. It's not as silly a story as I might like it to be. It's actually a little sad at times, but it starts off good. Because what would you think if I said Siberian cop with a god complex? Now, I'm guessing if you've kept up on random nonsense in the news at any point in the last 5 years, you may be thinking Steven Seagal, and that's close, but he's not vegan, or Siberian, or I suspect really a cop. But he does have a god complex, so... But I'm talking about Vissarion. Born in 1961 as Sergei Torop, he wouldn't become Vissarion until 1990 when he had a revelation that he was in fact Jesus Christ. Although, according to a BBC recording, that kind of comes off of like somebody who got really high during a first-year philosophy course and got a job writing the words on the slip inside fortune cookies. I'm sure that none of this had anything to do, though, with the fact that he lost his job as a traffic cop in 1989. Probably has nothing to do with the trying and failing to find UFOs to contact between those two things. And besides, he wasn't Jesus like we think of Jesus anyway. He was the Logos. He was the Word of God, the power by which God spoke the very cosmos into existence. Personally, since he was a painter while he was doing all this, it seems to me like he should have gotten a better hobby. Maybe building log cabins. Wait. No, he did that. Public speaking. Wait. Pottery? Could have been a potter. But instead he gained thousands of followers. 5,000 for sure, but I saw estimates going up to 10,000 globally, which for a dude who decided he was Jesus in the 90s is pretty fucking good. You'd seriously think he would have been at least a little overshadowed by the whole USSR dissolving thing, but our boy's not one to be dissuaded. And there are some differences between Vissarion and Jesus Mark I to be aware of. To be in Vissarion's congregation, you must be a strict vegan, not swear, not drink or smoke, or use money. Which, personally, I'm actually okay with kind of a lot of that. I'm not sure I can quit fucking swearing, though. Shit, man. Like, how the fuck am I supposed to do that shit? Just what the crap, Jesus? You also have to be okay with him leaving his wife for a girl he'd known since she was 7. That will come up again for a minute later, because it does have to do a little bit with how the church stands in the year 60, although then it was the year 30, because unlike the original Jesus, Vissarion recognizes the importance of making sure that the calendar is totally dependent on when you fell out of your mom. He's not going to wait for somebody to do it after he dies. There are, of course, a few other differences between the Jesus and the Jesus 2 Russian Boogaloo. One big one is the focus on reincarnation and the environmentalism. And while the OG, Jesus, was known for healing whatever you got on you, Jesus Reloaded claimed to just be able to heal cancer and HIV/AIDS, which does seem to indicate some issues. If this was just some guy's compound where he put his face up everywhere and people worshipped him by living sustainably and not hurting anybody, I wouldn't care, and it wouldn't really be interesting. But the thing about the Venn diagram of people who want to see you while you worship pictures of their face, and people who want to hurt you to get off on the power trip, is a circle. And one of the ways people can do that is by taking advantage of desperation. If you happen to have a disease like HIV or cancer, which in a lot of countries is pretty deal-withable. In Russia, though, the HIV rate is showing an increase of 10 to 15% a year, because you're run by homophobes, and when you have that kind of growth, you're going to find people you can manipulate into thinking you cured them while they die. And that is removed from the fact that HIV conspiracy theories we don't see other places are still super common in Russia anyway. And when you start believing in conspiracy theories, it gets easier to accept other ridiculous nonsense. And when you have strong religious convictions, it kind of connects all of that together, so your strong convictions and make you more likely to dive into things like conspiracy theories and possibly cults. I haven't seen research on that. The more into it you get, because the more anti-intellectual you get. So the whole thing is a fucked situation, and Vissarion was doing his part to gather up his little army of worshippers by saying that all he had to do was touch you and you'd be cured. Alexander Dworkin, who studies cults and works as an anti-cult activist who looks at home in a beret in a way I can only dream of, has described the Russian new religions like these as a response to Russian capitalism. He suggests that the followers may be sitting there thinking that the end of the world is coming, and you're sitting there with your fancy car, but I have Jesus, so who is going to get the last laugh? And that's a pretty strong conviction when it reflects the points I made regarding social psychology earlier. And for a while it seemed like Vissarion would be getting the last laugh. So I'm going to be using the history of Vissarion's cult, the Church of the Last Testament, as meat in a lore sandwich. And for the bread, I'm going to be using the fact that on September 22nd, 2020, Sergei Vissarion Torab, Vadim Redkin, who the BBC calls a former pop star and thinks it's okay just to fucking gloss over that, so I will be looking more into that guy because that's a story I want to know, and Vladimir Vedirnikov were arrested on multiple charges, including extortion and causing psychological and physical harm, including grievous harm to 2 or more people, which is when it starts getting, explicitly and demonstrably sad. They were arrested by the federal police, and apparently it involved helicopters and military equipment because Russia operates in an 11 fucking constantly, but also because fuck that guy. I'm not going to say that part of that is killing people by laying on hands, because I can't for sure, but I want so bad for it to be murder by wizard hands because fuck this guy. Because of this arrest, the Russian government has decided to seize and liquidate the church while wiping it from the local registers. Now, as for what was done, I am having a hell of a time finding specifics, which isn't actually super surprising, because if there's one thing we know about Russia's willingness to be super crazy open with information about the goings-on in their society, it's the lack of willingness. I can say at this time that the lands have been seized and the homes and vehicles of church leaders have been seized and have been found to be worth 12.2 million rubles, or around 164,000 American monies. There will also be some stuff about specifics that I think relate to the charges, but like I said, I can't be sure, and I'm not really sure how to access Russian court dockets. They had been investigated multiple times for a while. In the 1990s, there were members who died of either suicide or because they were living without modern accoutrements and there was a lack of medical care, which did not have to be entirely Vissarion's fault. Honestly, I mean, it is, because he outlawed medical intervention, but there was also one hospital and a couple clinics in the district he was in, and none of them were on the mountain they were living on, apparently. And it's a small district, but it's small for being in the middle of nowhere in Russia, so it's a empty small. And I can't imagine that it's Russia's healthcare central capital where you go for all the greatest stuff, but you'd think at some point he would have tried to convert a doctor who could have helped out of thousands of people. It's really giving me like a, come on, Jesus, show us what you can do. Oh, nothing? Maybe recruit a doctor, bus to go to a clinic, teleport them there because you're supposed to be Jesus, you fucking prick kind of reaction. And probably would be reacting a little less like this if it wasn't Jesus's fault that it was a cult on a mountain where medical treatment was banned. Just like Sergei, there was totally a way out of this, but instead he took the idea that we see in places that are heavily inundated with Christianity to the point of their own self-destruction, like America, that if you are disabled or different, somehow it's because there's something wrong with you, you have some moral failing, or there's something unwantable about you that made you be like that. And he applied that to illness. If you were properly living in attunement with nature, you wouldn't get sick. So clearly there was some character flaw you have to work out in order to heal, which seems to imply that if you died, you were just too terrible a person to be allowed to live, which seems like a hard case to make when the people in question are children, doesn't it? And this is actually something that we see in Buddhism. It's really easy for rich Buddhists and rich Hindus to tell people that if they live a good life, they'll come back in the next one and be rich too. It's like a seed faith, but the payoff is heaven. Like it's a seed faith where it doesn't matter because you won't even find out you got screwed until after you die. It's a little more sadistic, and it's something that we see with, the Dalai Lama pre-1960s as a wealthy political leader. It's something that my Buddhist instructor told me was a thing that made them nervous about Buddhism coming to America, that they being the big brains in Buddhism in the pre-60s before D.T. Suzuki showed up with Zen. And I get it. Because this is what we would do with it. And this is what I'm sure is being done with it in the States now. Actually, I know for a fact it is. There's a guy who's doing this, and I will find him, and I will put him on the list of assholes to cover, and he will be a Buddhism episode. So anyway, the children were horribly broken, probably due to something they did in a past life. But on the flip side of that, there is a group of people who will be testifying against Sergei and the Apostles who have a list of children who died from medical care because Jesus round 2 told them so in the last testament Timmy will ever hear. Although, according to Alexander Dorovorov, who acted like a press secretary, this is ridiculous. There aren't actually any prohibitions, there are just recommendations. Because you know how when you believe someone is the second coming of Jesus who had to show up to give us a refresher course because of how horrible the world has become, and he's the only one who can save you, and he tells you not to go to a doctor because the only thing that heals the flesh is spiritual development and improvement. It's just a recommendation, and in the compound you live in, he's the boss, and conflict is prohibited, so you're not allowed to argue when he says this stupid bullshit, and you can't leave because you gave them all your crap because that's what you do in a cult. So when your kid dies because you didn't take him to a doctor, you sit there and you can tell yourself it's okay because his soul just sucked. And maybe next time he'll be born into a family who doesn't take medical advice from a fucking con man in the fucking mountains. You know, like a recommendation. Or precept number 37, according to a woman named Yelena, who thought her husband was brainwashed and Vissarion was a con man, but also that she couldn't make it without him, so she went along with Vissarion. And I'm going to take another tangent here. And I'm also going to go on a limb and guess that none of these people had read Karl Popper. See, the thing that Karl Popper did that was so crazy, stupid, important for science was answer a question about what makes science, as it's done now, so superior, being falsification. He did this by contrasting science as it was being done at the time, and largely is done now. I'm sure something has changed since, but the institutionalized falsification is still the core of it. And he did this by contrasting science to non-scientific theories like Marxism or Freudian psychoanalysis. The distinguishing thing, he said, was that you could explain anything in the terms of these theories, whereas you can't do that with science. Science explains one thing. When you answer a scientific question, you get an answer to a question. Sometimes that answers multiple questions. Sometimes it shows you a step you were missing to find an answer for another question, but you get one answer. So the odds of gravity explaining why light takes the path of least resistance is pretty slim to none, unless I'm hugely misunderstanding physics at a very basic level. Want to know what direction your ball is going to bounce? You probably don't need Planck's constant, unless, of course, for some reason you needed to know the amount of energy a photon has in order to know that your ball is going to bounce out at the same angle it bounced in with. And that's not going to explain dark matter. Human and social interactions, by contrast, seem to be explained by a number of sometimes contradictory political, psychological, and sociological theories. This, Popper said, was pseudoscience, and while I have some issues with some of the things that labels as pseudoscience because of how broad it is, and I really hate overly broad definitions, it does serve to illustrate the other issue that Starovarov brought up. Torup created a mishmash of religious and political ideology. Russia Beyond lists Marxism, Hinduism, and Buddhism in addition to Orthodox Christianity as things that Vissarion would bring up to explain away whatever ails you. This led to him being a very particular kind of incoherent, but hey, it was the 90s, and we had really different ideas of what made you deep. So you sounded wise and mystical and had answers for everything, and you're gonna get people to really cling to your recommendations because you're tarot carding them with your words. It was not unlike that time where he said he wanted to show his followers, and do you remember the kid from the beginning of the episode? This is where she comes back. He told his followers he wanted to show them how to love purely, so he allowed polygamy. He said that for the submissiveness of women, men could have as many wives as they want, and proceeded to leave his wife for a 16-year-old girl while the guys in the commune started passing wives around and doing whatever the fuck to whomever the fuck. And this was about the same time that the investigation started the first time. Doctors and teachers, the people that Vissarion said you didn't need if you had a pure and developed spirit, started demanding an investigation. A photographer who went there a bunch of times said that he thought the reason that never really went anywhere was because the authorities were worried an arrest would lead to a mass suicide. And I'm not going to say that that's because very recently Heaven's Gate had happened, but also this wasn't super long after Heaven's Gate. And the church had revolving case managers, which seems to have lasted more or less the rest of the time. So back to the arrest. After 2 infants died, there began to be probes where hundreds of members were questioned and investigated. The local administrator had retired, and the local loggers started telling them that their protection was gone, and the top-ranking members were going to be arrested, which seems kind of like they had something or was somehow involved with the local administrator, because then the arrests came. And I don't believe that everything needs a devil's advocate. And in fact, I think that everything here is about bad guys. Because Vissarion is a bad guy. But some of the Vissarionites believe they're being strong-armed out of the area due to anti-logging protests that would have resulted in a road being built in previously untouched land, and because they happen to be in a major logging area with nearby gold mines. And while that's a pretty good way to try and back yourself up and pull a victim card, I'm not really sure that it matters all that much. The people being displaced are a serious problem. Like that, they should not be being displaced because they were victimized. And it does kind of make it seem like there's some kind of local government angle to it, but children died and people were conned out of their money. So there absolutely needs to be accountability for Vissarion and Redkin and all the rest of the Last Testament apostle gang. But it is tough because the people around them are getting hurt by the unethical actions of these people. And the ecosystem of humanity and the way we treat each other when we're somebody who does something right or when we're acting in regards to somebody who does something wrong has been kind of a big theme for me in my life recently. So there does need to be accountability. And part of that accountability needs to be Vissarion helping to undisplace these people. But I mean, that's not going to happen because that's not really reality. Russia is not going to operate that way. And if he gets out of prison, he's going to continue having followers, even if it's not as many. At the end of the BBC video, they jumped around between the people they interviewed and they talk about whether he's a fraud or the actual literal second coming. And there are different takes, of course. Most of the people they interview think he's a con man, including children who were brought to they call it the Sun City when they were very little and grew up thinking that their parents were just nuts. And that makes sense because while their parents weren't nuts, their parents were duped. He was just making shit up. But there are still some true believers. There are people who've been true believers since the beginning, even going through what they talk about as revealed wisdom. And when I look at this, I just see abuse and people not feeling like they can leave. And in every movement, every harmful movement, it's the true believers that are really the problem. What if they convinced the next Russian president? What if there was some kind of crazy personality cult with an American president who hadn't faced real accountability? What if the next Russian president started to eliminate the metaphysical competition, as it were? What if then it spread? What if Vissarion was the second coming of Christ and it spread through the barrel of a gun instead of at the tip of a sword? In 2,000 years, would we have a big statue of Vissarion in Rio? Would we have people fighting to put up the 61 commandments in courthouses? Cults like this are dangerous, and not just to the believers. To be perfectly honest, I don't see a difference between Vissarion, Q, Kenneth Copeland, Zakir Naik, or Ray Comfort. None of these things are times when dying for a lie is the question. These are all things where there are cases of people killing for a lie, and that's a lot more dangerous. These are all people who teach things that lead to death, whether by suicide, by lack of doctors, by being the victim of abuse and murder. And not every death involves them having a physical weapon, but they're all as guilty as Vissarion. If this was a fun story of vegans in the mountains in Russia, I probably wouldn't have done this episode. I might have. There may have been enough material about that for me to crack some jokes, but I probably wouldn't have. And honestly, I probably would have been tempted to go off and join them if it was just a bunch of chill hippies in the mountains. Because living in the mountains in a little house sounds fucking fantastic lately. The story, though, is a con man taking advantage of desperate and easily fooled people with vague and undeep nonsense. The story here is the arrest of a criminal to be tried in April, and I have the old Google alert set. But the point is that with all of this, if it was millions of people instead of thousands, it wouldn't be a cult with a guy who thinks he's Jesus. It would be looked at as a religion with a prophet. And these religions gain power. I'm going to go through more cults and organizations like this, and we're going to see that. We're going to see them in government, and it's going to be scary. But for now, we'll rest it on it to be continued, and I will mention it as soon as that old Google alert tells me what he's been convicted of and how long he'll be convicted of it. But until then, I've been the High Apostate. This has been the Apostate's Playground. Thank you for joining me. Patreon and the store in the show notes. Please take the polls on Patreon when they're given. That lets me work with you to make this a podcast that we both want to give our time and attention to. And if you feel compelled to give, if you feel compelled to support good work, please do so. And please give to an organization that is helping people in Texas. There's some in the live doc, and I'm including the Act Blue link to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's efforts, fundraising efforts to help people. There are also the show notes in the show notes. The Twitter for me is the letter X Essential Panda. The Twitter for the show is back after being temporarily down because I accidentally told Twitter it was being operated by a 7-month-old because what even are years? And that's at Apostasy Powered. For feedback, comments, concerns, cookie recipes, and compliments about my beard, send an email to poweredbyapostasy@gmail.com, and hate mail can be written on a 4x5 note card, folded up nice and small and shoved all the way up your butt. So stay safe, stay healthy, and if you can, help someone stay warm. We told Mom and Dad when we got Texas that we would make sure they were watered, fed, and taken care of, and this is when we need to step up because our puppy is locked outside in the cold.